One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, I'm Ebony Bennett and welcome to our special summer series of Follow the Money. Over the last few years, tens of thousands of people from Pacific Island nations and Timor Leste have come to Australia to work under the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme, or the PALM scheme. The Australian government says PALM is a triple win. Australian employers get employees, migrant workers and their families earn Australian dollars, and countries of origin across the region enjoy the flow-on benefits of higher incomes. But there are major concerns about the scheme, including reports of underpayment, exploitation and worker abuse. Both the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery have identified the PALM scheme as a modern slavery risk. Today's episode is the first of a 4-part mini-series that we're broadcasting throughout this week. Morgan Harrington, Research Manager at the Australia Institute, travelled to Vanuatu and Leeton in New South Wales to find out more about the PALM scheme and its impact on workers and their communities. Here's what he found out, and we'll be back with regular programming next week.
Pele Island, Vanuatu, isn't far from the capital of Port Vila, but it's a world away from Stanthorpe, Queensland. That's where a local community leader earned the money to build an ecotourism business on this beach.
My name is Enoch. I live on Pele Island, and I am chairman council of this village. Working on behalf of the chief to administration in this village. It is better to earn money in Australia because, let's say, triple time in Vanuatu for fortnight. If you live 1 year or over 1 year, it's more than you work in Vanuatu for 10 years.
Enoch is one of the thousands of people from Vanuatu who've worked in Australia under the PALM scheme. It stands for Pacific Australia Labour Mobility. Under the scheme, tens of thousands of people from countries across the Pacific and East Timor can temporarily work in Australia. They can only do so-called low-skilled jobs in meat processing, aged care, childcare and hospitality. Or, like Enoch, in agriculture, the industry that employs most PALM workers. Enoch's done pretty well out of PALM.
The money that I make in Australia, I put them back to my country and come to my island, come to my communities, and then I started my small business, bungalow.
Enoch says the money and the jobs from the bungalow business mean less people have to head off by boat to the mainland.
The business is going good, and when I started my small business, I see much enough for me to gain when I'm in Vanuatu. So I'm not going back to Australia, but I stay to looking after my small business.
Enoch says his bungalow business is helping to protect nearby reefs because people are less dependent on fishing.
When we do the bungalow in Pele Island, we got more than you work for somebody in the city or in Port Vila. So, and then the next thing is we preserve all the resources in the water. More fish, more clam shells in the water.
These are some of the upsides of the PALM scheme. It can help people like Enoch get ahead. But there are big problems too.
Chup chup simbe, chup chup simbe, simbe tang li tang, simbe tang li tang.
I'm Morgan Harrington. I travelled to Vanuatu and regional New South Wales to investigate the scheme for Palmed Off, this special 4-part series of Follow the Money. I spoke to workers, government officials, academics and community organisations. I also spoke to Thomas Costa, the Assistant Secretary at Unions New South Wales. He knows all about Palm's downsides.
Part of my responsibility is looking after our migrant worker programs, and we started to identify that actually when you look at it in detail, a lot of the visas in Australia create a kind of dependency relationship between the migrant worker and their employer, and that makes them very vulnerable to exploitation. And when we look at this visa, it's very unique compared to other visas in that it really restrains workers to only work for one employer while they're on their visa. And if they lose that employment or they decide to leave that employment, they have to leave the country. The visa essentially ends.
The scheme has even been accused of allowing modern slavery in Australia.
Well, if we go back to basics, I think the central problem is that it treats people who come here from overseas narrowly as economic inputs.
That's Dr. James Cockayne, the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner. In 2024, his office released a report about modern slavery in the state. It found that certain visa categories, including palm visas, show, quote, a pattern of conduct involving indicators of forced labour, deceptive recruiting, possible sexual servitude, and emerging labour trafficking. It said this could amount to modern slavery offences under both Commonwealth and New South Wales law.
This is not a long-term settlement program. They're not coming here to get on a pathway to citizenship in Australia. Nonetheless, people are not just economic inputs. For people who don't have a history of working in Australia, don't know how you enforce your rights through a union, don't know how you enforce your rights through other remedial mechanisms, this can very quickly trap them in a position essentially of debt bondage or indentured labour. And because the scheme is set up in a way that restricts their ability to move freely to another employer, it makes them very, very vulnerable to exploitation by dodgy contractors, dodgy managers. So that lack of mobility is clearly a key question that needs to be thought through.
This isn't the first time that Australia has been accused of enslaving people from the Pacific. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, some 60,000 Pacific Islanders were brought to work in Australia. Blackbirding is the term used to describe this dark chapter in our shared history. People were exploited in ways that range from unethical labour contracts to outright kidnapping.
So my name is Wazikum, my custom name from Vanuatu, from Tana. Imelda Davis is my birth name, but I'm a second-generation descendant, Australian South Sea Islander.
Wazikum, or Imelda, has spent years advocating for palm workers. She is painfully aware of Australia's sorry history.
My grandfather was blackbirded to Australia. That's my mother's father. He was 12 years old, taken off the beach in Tana. And I guess my relationship is an ongoing legacy of activism by the descendants of the blackbirding trade, which occurred first and foremost with New South Wales in 1847. And we're giving voice to that truth through the work of Australian South Sea Islanders, Port Jackson.
She sees parallels between the historic exploitation of Pacific migrant labour and what's happening today.
We can't change anything, but we need to stop what's going on today. Because what I've seen and witnessed with my journeys across this nation as a part of the Palm scheme, it's just not acceptable. We had a caravan out the back, and when it rained, the river would rise and the water would come through the rust in the bottom of the caravan. They had 5 men in a caravan, and then the snakes would come through the rust of the floor into the caravan. Like, they don't even live like that in Vanuatu, but yet they're paying top dollar to sleep in a caravan?
Being overcharged for substandard accommodation is a common problem. So are deductions for transportation to and from the worksite that eat into the pay of palm workers.
Everyone pays $10 a day to get in a bus that drives them around the corner, yeah, and you've got a bus full of 20 people, good money, yeah, and you're paying $190 a week. So that's what I've seen.
The problems associated with the palm scheme are not confined to Australia. There are a raft of consequences for the Pacific. Villages across Vanuatu and other countries are being reshaped, for better and for worse. This former palm worker wanted to remain anonymous, so let's call him John.
One thing you will notice when you are going around the villages, you will see half-built houses. People building houses, standing up brick walls, solid houses, concrete houses, roofing. And these houses they belong to workers who are in Australia. Now those people, they are not in the villages anymore. These people, they used to stay around and they used to do the village chores. They would clean up the village, they would work around the community needs, they would go gardening, they would go fishing, and they would be involved in anything that has to do with the communities. Nowadays, everyone is gone. Even the ones with good paying jobs, working in banks, around government agencies or government departments, they've all left.
So who really benefits from the palm scheme?
And the answer, as best we can tell, is that the gains are very much lopsided.
Dr. Matt Withers is from the Australian National University. He spent years researching the palm scheme.
And the distribution of those returns looks something like $806 million of overall contribution to Australia's economy, relative to only about $184 million that was then remitted back to the Pacific. So for every dollar that is being sent back to Pacific Island countries and Timor Leste, roughly $4.50 of value is staying in Australia and contributing to our economy.
That's over $800 million staying in Australia and less than $200 million going back to the Pacific and Timor Leste.
And so that $806 million, that figure represents an enormous value add to various industries in which palm workers are employed and the towns in which they live. The direct profits to employers were calculated to be $289 million over this 4-year period. And then there's a huge amount of money which is going to rent and everyday expenditure. All these other kinds of contributions to the Australian economy that migrant workers make on a day-to-day basis. Not to mention about $154 million in terms of taxable contributions over that period of time as well. I actually began my academic career examining migration from Sri Lanka to countries of the Persian Gulf in the so-called Kafala system, which is one of the most notorious and exploitative guest worker migration corridors globally. And one of the really striking things about the palm scheme is how similar it is to those corridors of migration. So palm scheme workers, like those in the Gulf, are tied to a single employer for the duration of their time in Australia. They also do not have rights to family accompaniment, despite being in country for as long as 4 years at a stretch, and nor do they have rights to access social protection systems that their taxes contribute to while they're working in Australia.
The stakes are high. The Pacific is changing in unprecedented ways. The stories that people tell about the palm scheme could make or break Australia's reputation in the region. When I asked him if going to Australia on the palm scheme was worth it, here's what John had to say.
So I was in the tomato farm for 2 years, and I did 1 year in abattoir with the meat works.
So does that mean you went 3 years without coming back to Vanuatu?
I only returned when my grandmother passed away. She passed away on my 2nd year there. So I explained to her, look, grandmother, I'm not going to be able to send you money as often as it sounds, because we are still under deduction. So by the 2nd year, she already left me, but I did not fulfill my promise with her. For me, thinking about it, coming back and looking back, it was not worth it going to Australia for 3 years, because I got deductions for 9 months, which held me up until my 2nd year. And by the time I got to the 2nd year, most of the people who were inspired by me leaving already gave up hope.
Muriel Melton-Oven is Vanuatu's Commissioner for Labour. She oversees her country's participation in the palm scheme.
We're not dealing with commodities. Our workers are not commodities. They're human beings, and we need to take care of them. It's because of our workers that a farmer can economically sustain his or her business. And people or citizens can have food on the table. It's because of these workers. They are doing a job, but in return, we should also take care of them.
Chop chop simbe, chop chop simbe, simbe tang li tang, simbe tang li tang.
Join us as we travel the path of the palm scheme, from the villages of Vanuatu to the farms of the New South Wales riverina. In the next episode, we hear from people who have walked away from the palm scheme.
We work 8 hours in 6 months, but when it came to 3 months left, we just work 4 and 3 hours.
So you can't earn enough?
Yeah. So sometimes we left with $80, $90 for a week.
Palmed Off was written and produced by Morgan Harrington, with production and script advice from Stephen Long. Sound production and engineering by Simon Branthwaite. The song you have heard is Mumbwe from the album Sorusian by Ni Vanuatu artist Tio, with thanks to the Wantok Music Foundation. This podcast was recorded in Canberra, on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples.
Side.